If you're going to Lisbon, you'll go to Alfama. You should do. And if you're going to Alfama, very soon after, the next day, go to Barrio Alto. Deep in it, you'll find a very contrasting grid of streets compared to the ad hoc vernacular of Alfama. There was more of this, but in a Francophile, much of Portugal is very France-friendly. They copied Haussmann in Paris and knocked down big bits of the Barrio Alto to build the boulevards. And that vantage point that all the cafes and restaurants are focused on, Chiado, at Barrio Alto's southern border, opens up, big square, tall, several-storey imposing buildings, of quality again. Portugal's most famous Romantic era writer, Eca de Queiroz, considered Chiado his spiritual home. The writer Eca de Queiroz, who features in this sculpture, in quite a quiet little park near a fire station, was a diplomat and lived abroad for much of the time, writing some of his best works in Bristol, in England, Northumbria, and lived in Paris for a while. On first appearances, the statue of the older guy looking down on the naked little girl looks seedy, to say the least. Over the sturdy nakedness of truth, the diaphanous cloak of fantasy. This is a quote from one of his books, The Relic. I'm not sure the naked girl is that sturdy, really. Petite, but not fragile. Joyful, but dominated by the author looking down her cleavage from behind. All suited respectably. Perhaps it's something of the Belle Epoque era Paris that the Portuguese and the author so enjoyed. We should perhaps remember that both north in Barrio Alto and south of Chiado were some of the most long-standing areas of prostitution in Lisbon. The truth isn't necessarily the truth in justice, it's the truth of life, as it's seen by the author. Queiroz' parents didn't marry until he was 4. He's got humour in all his books, wry, satirical. He's considered the modern author. Romantic era, but in that book that he wrote while he was in Bristol, there's an Oedipus-like theme where brother and sister get separated at a young age and don't recognise each other when they meet through a mutual friend. The mutual friend eventually tells them after they've started a very intimate romantic relationship that the brother and the sister have had sex by accident. He sort of just writes out the sister after that and tells us all about the brother. But perhaps that's to communicate something of just how people get lost when they're onto the streets. Another more controversial book ends up with an orphan adopted by his aunt starts selling religious relics after a trip to the Holy Land, just for her, though he had a hankering for Paris. Some quite inventive, obscure objects linked vaguely to biblical tales turned into handy little items, like cigar boxes, and ends up making more money than he would have inherited from ingratiating himself falsely to his pious aunt. Dickens, Balzac, Tolstoy, these are his contemporaries who he gets compared to. Queiroz was from Póvoa, Varzim. This is north of Porto. But at age 16, he was yet another product of the University of Coimbra, where he studied law, and met a poet friend. Worked as a journalist in Evora, and created an amusing newsletter of a fictional adventurer. In a brief period in Lisbon, Queiroz travelled to Egypt. The Suez Canal was opening at the time. His first works, The Mystery of the Sintra Road, and The Relic, were accused of plagiarism. The Crime of Father Amaro, he wrote while a municipal administrator in Leiria about a priest who wasn't best suited to the career that he'd been pushed into and couldn't keep his thing in his trousers and was getting women pregnant. I don't know if he equates the municipal and consular jobs that he was doing to the clergy, but it does beg whether it's a bit autobiographical. Havana in Cuba, he was stationed for a couple of years. Then stark contrast, Newcastle-on-Tyne, Northumberland, Durham. Recording for the Portuguese government why people, miners, that earned twice as much as those in South Wales and had lots more perks were the militant ones. He sent from London some letters that got turned into a book. Stoke Bishop near Bristol and Notting Hill in London he lived. with his wife. He was very cosmopolitan and well-read. What did this Portuguese writer think of Britain? Everything about this society is disagreeable to me, from its limited way of thinking to its indecent manner of cooking vegetables. The weather is endlessly bad. But he wasn't bored here and stayed here for 15 years. I detest England, but this does not stop me from declaring that, as a thinking nation, she is probably the foremost. England acted as a constant stimulus and a corrective to Ecker's traditional Portuguese Francophilia. Queiroz's politics were liberal, but he described himself as a vague, saddened anarchist, which was perhaps some sort of humour because he was consul general in Paris for Portugal, in Neuilly-sur-Seine, in the 16th arrondissement of Paris area. In 1900, he was to die of tuberculosis or Crohn's disease, we're not too sure, and his son was to take a job with Salazar in his dictatorship. Perhaps his last book, The City and the Mountains, talks about a rich gentleman living the emptiness of upper-class life in Paris, who inherits a farm in rural Portugal, moves there, never receives his things from Paris, takes up with a local woman, improves the conditions of the poor locals, has a son and is settled. It's satirical. His formula for a good life in Paris had contorted itself into a debilitating kind of retail therapy. How many of us at some point don't want to go back to the land? It's difficult to describe timing and satire without the context. There's the context of the time, but also the context of the rest of the story. A gentleman of ability and leisure, everything falls in his lap. He doesn't have to run for anything, unless you step out of your drunken haze into the streets and you've missed the last tram. You can see it going. The two drunken elitists calling for the poor tram driver to risk his job for them and stop and help them out.
Everything's safe and it doesn't get worse on mine.